I would ask Reverend Bannister to say prayers.
So let us pray. Heavenly Father, we come before you in prayer this evening. At this time of political unrest and uncertainty, we pray for our nation and for the Queen and her government. We pray for Parliament as it struggles to agree a way forward in the negotiations concerning our departure of the European Union. May a right and just settlement be agreed that serves the needs of the many rather than the few. We pray also at this time for the challenges facing our communities as a result of the increase in knife crime, especially amongst our younger people. We pray for local councils, for members of Parliament, the police and the NHS, and where they still exist, for all youth services as they seek to respond to this crisis. We pray for this borough of Fylde and for its communities. We especially pray for those living in poverty and for the homeless in this borough. We give you thanks and pray for the work of the Fylde Food Bank. Father God, we ask for your blessing upon this meeting and its work of managing and administering the financial resources entrusted to this council to serve the needs of its citizens. Bless both the elected members and officers of this council. Remind them of their accountability in deploying the financial resources of this council to serve the needs of those who they are appointed and elected to serve, especially for the vulnerable members of our communities. Grant your blessing and protection upon the Mayor as he carries out his duties in representing this borough as its primary ambassador and first citizen. We make these prayers through your Son, our Lord Jesus Christ, and in the power of your Holy Spirit. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you. Before we start the meeting proper, I'd just like to run through some housekeeping for members of the public. The fire escapes are on the door to the right or through the door to the left, to my left, and to the left again. The toilets, the gents, out of the door to my left, and at the bottom of the stairs, the ladies are on the first floor. Agenda item 1, declarations of interest. Do any members have any personal or prejudicial interest to declare? Thank you. Agenda item 2, budget procedure rules. Members are reminded that procedure rules for the budget council meeting differ to ordinary council meetings, and I refer you to the Budget Council Procedure Rules on page 3 of your agendas. I'd just like to point out at this point that all votes at this meeting are to be recorded. That's in the Constitution. It's been something that hasn't been picked up in the past, but it is there. I've checked with the monitoring officer, so there's no need to ask for anyone to ask for a recorded vote. I will propose from the Chair, agenda item 3, confirmation of minutes. I will propose from the Chair that the minutes of the meeting held on the 11th of February 2019 be confirmed as a correct record. The Deputy Mayor normally seconds this item. She's not here tonight. She's not very well. So can I ask any member to second this, Councillor Rhodes? Agenda item 4, Mayor's announcements. You might be wondering why I'm dressed like Father Christmas on Pancake Day. I've got another engagement after this council meeting. It's the Shrove Tuesday debate at St Margaret's. I'd like to make a special welcome to Councillor Mark Bamforth, who's attending this meeting by remote access, I believe.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Right, thank you, Mark. And I've already given apologies for the Deputy Mayor. Agenda item 5, Chief Executive's communications. Chief Executive, do you have any communications to report?
I've none this evening, thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Agenda item 6, questions from members of the Council. There are no questions from members of the Council this evening. Agenda item 7, questions from members of the public. There are no questions from members of the public this evening. Agenda item 8, the medium-term financial strategy update. I'd like to invite Councillor Sue Fazakerley to introduce this item.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Mayor, colleagues, it is my privilege this evening to introduce the 2019-2020 budget for Fylde Council, which reflects another excellent year of sound financial management and plans for more of the same in the year to come. I will shortly hand over to the Chairman of the Finance and Democracy Committee, Councillor Karen Buckley, who will propose the Council budget and, as usual, will take us all through the detail. Mr. Mayor, this is the 5th budget I have introduced, and it is difficult to find a new approach to what might be termed my preamble to the main purpose of the evening, particularly as what is to come is very similar, I am delighted to say, to recent budgets, continuing the good tidings of a council still delivering high-quality services despite a diminishing resource and funding worthwhile and significant capital projects and initiatives throughout the borough. To attain the enviable, robust financial position we have achieved, members and officers have continued to work positively and effectively in the face of cuts and will continue to do so as local government faces the uncertainty of the years ahead. We continue to be the envy of the vast majority of other Lancashire authorities, and thankfully Fylde's story is not one of cutting services, losing staff and diminishing reserves, about which I so frequently hear from other leaders. And I would like to thank all those, both members and officers, who have contributed to this success story. We have also had a particularly successful year in attracting outside funding, with significant grants awarded to the Fairhaven Coast Protection Scheme, the restoration of Fairhaven Lake and Gardens, renovation work on St Anne's Pier, and also at Lytham Hall. These grants are hard come by, and our officers are to be congratulated for their input to the bidding process. For the first time, I'd also like to make special mention of the members of the Budget Working Group, who over the past 4 years, since the return of the committee system, have met regularly throughout the year and are a significant contributor to the budget before you this evening. The financial footing we have achieved by approving sound and sensible budgets over the past few years is allowing us to deliver the strategic priorities for the borough as set out in our corporate plan. Not only do we offer core services to a good standard, but we support facilities that many other district authorities have had to forego, including 2 pools, a theatre, and we shall shortly see the opening of the greatly anticipated water feature on the promenade on the site of the former paddling pool. I was going to say, as we look out of the windows this evening, but there's very few of us who can actually see out of the windows. But we all know that we can witness the last stage of the accommodation project, which has been a huge success on so many fronts and has been achieved with relatively little disruption to the smooth operation of the town hall. I would ask that my colleagues in this chamber tonight support the proposed budget for 2019-20, so that together we can continue the excellent work we have achieved to date. Fellow councillors, before I finish, I would like to pay tribute, as usual, to the excellent work of Paul O'Donoghue, Paul Swindles and the team throughout the year, and particularly in preparation for this budget. And also, of course, to the Deputy Leader, Councillor Karen Buckley, for her most capable leadership of the Finance and Democracy Committee, and the countless hours which I know she dedicates to all matters financial for Fylde Council with such a successful outcome. Mr. Mayor, it is with great pleasure that I now invite the Chairman of the Finance and Democracy Committee to propose the 2019-20 budget for Fylde Council. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Buckley.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. Colleagues, I'd like to propose the budget for 1920, and can I refer you to the council tax resolution for council. It's dated the 5th of March. It's on your desks in front of you. This is the resolution that I am asking that we support and we vote and pass this evening. The first page of which is identical to that which went before Finance and Democracy Committee, but as members will know, it then goes on to deal with all precepted areas, parish and town council, and notes the precepts of the county council, police and fire authority. This is the comprehensive resolution, and it is on your desk, and that is what we are voting on this evening. Mr. Mayor, this is my 12th year on the council. There's a group of 8 of us who began this journey in 2007. And I can say, and I know they will agree, what a huge privilege it is to serve on this council, and for me to have a role in its finances since 2011. I don't take that responsibility lightly. But this is a team effort, and it is a winning formula. Changing the way we do things, adapting our management structure, going more digital, finding new income streams. These are ways to work smarter and do more with less. And that is evident when you look back at the financial forecasts just over the last few years. Take 2007, when I first came on the council. Our projected budget requirement at that time was £11.5 million. Inflation has been running at an average of 2.7% per annum since that time, meaning that according to the Office for National Statistics Composite Price Index, prices in 2019 are 37.6% higher than average prices in 2007. Following that trend, our budget requirement of £11.5 million in 2007 would now be £15.8 million. Instead, it is £10.2 million. We, on this side of the chamber and forming the administration, are conservatives. In local politics, that means we treat with care the taxpayers' money that is deducted from every hard-working individual. It is not the council's money, it is my money and it is your money. So when we had the chance to freeze council tax, we did. Unlike the opposition who criticised us for not taking as much money as we could from Fylde residents, we looked carefully at the needs of the council and made decisions based upon that. Over that time, we still made savings at yearly outturn, and we put that money aside into a capital investment reserve, which is now, in later years, being used to improve facilities for all. This year, we have the opportunity of raising council tax for a Band D by £5 or 3%, whichever is the greater. We have decided not to follow that route and the route of the majority of councils in Lancashire to take the maximum increase, but instead we have opted for the lower of the two figures, which is the £5 increase on a Band D and is equivalent to 2.48% increase. Colleagues may know that BBC News this morning reported that council tax bills in England are to rise on an average of 4.5%. Looking at the forecast for the year ahead, it still leaves us with an estimated surplus of nearly £1 million, which again will be reinvested for residents. Those of us who live in Fylde appreciate its quality. Recently, that appreciation has spread on a national level, and it begs the question, what has that got to do with the council? Well, my answer is an awful lot. The return of Lytham Festival in 2009 took place at risk to the council as we agreed to underwrite it. It has since grown in popularity on a massive scale, meaning we can attract the very top talent. In contrast, but just as popular, is the Wartime Weekend, an event entirely hosted by the council. Another event of significance was the brainchild of a local resident, and that is the Kite Festival, now an internationally known event and one which grew far beyond one person's dreams. The decision to assist with the management of this event and to put funds behind it secures it for the future. And lately, Fylde was well and truly put on the map last month by the filming of a BBC series called World on Fire, depicting World War II scenes of Dunkirk right here on our beach. There are so many success stories to mention, from grants for parks in rural Fylde to the fantastic sea defence work along the coast and the award of the Heritage Lottery Fund to restore Fairhaven Lake. But on to this year's particular budget proposals. Members will find them set out on pages 50 and 51 of the agenda papers. These are familiar to members, as each has been before the relevant programme committee and also the Finance and Democracy Committee and were roundly endorsed. So these are, in terms of revenue, the community projects funding amount of £20,000 rolling forwards, supporting grants to community groups right across Fylde. Further event support, £46,000 and rolling that forward. And then in terms of capital, there's addition to £200,000 for accommodation facilities at Snowdon Road Depot to meet some long required health and safety issues there. Areas of Ashton Gardens, the play area and nursery improvements, also capital items. An addition for improvement of our signage along the coast. Help to control and put up barriers to stop illegal encampments. An arts project for the coastal explorers. We're putting in £20,000. It leaves us in a total sum of £120,000. A support for more tree planting across the borough. A regeneration scheme in Lytham for capital funding for a few years hence. And a new block of toilet facilities at North Beach Car Park. A barrier scheme at Stanner Bank at Fairhaven. And finally, further regeneration in St Anne's from St Anne's Road on St Anne's Road West, which is the Square to Pier link. Those capital programmes total just under £1 million for this following year, and then 300,000 and 100,000 in years to come. Some substantial investment, I'm sure colleagues will agree. Since the budget proposals went before Finance and Democracy, we have received, and they're in the papers, 2 budget consultation responses. These are set out on page 133. One is from Singleton Parish Council, and one is from Little Eccleston and Larbecq Parish Council, and they are worthy of a response. The one from Singleton Parish Council complains of the allocation of capital expenditure to the coastal areas and a lack of support for their play area. I have looked into the bids that have been brought forward for Singleton to the Community Projects Fund, and I'm really pleased to see that there have been a number of successful bids in relation to the village hall and also the bowling club. The parish council was turned down in relation to the play area because bids to the fund are to be made by community groups and not the parish council, and that's part of the criteria of the fund. As has been encouraged on many occasions in committee, and I have been present when this is the case, if a friends group puts forward a bid to our parks department, they would be very willing to work with them. It is a few years now since we made the decision to open up our parks development team to all areas of Fylde, even where we did not own the parks in question. The other consultation response from Little Eccleston and Larbecq Parish Council requests that the budget proposals be brought before the Parish Liaison Committee. However, the extract taken from the minutes relate to operational matters and not budget matters, and I understand that the Chief Executive has clarified this. But I can only repeat that the budget items listed in Appendix F have been before the programme committees and then before the Finance and Democracy Committee, and are therefore in the public domain well ahead of the official time for consultation should the parishes wish to take an interest. As can be seen, Fylde is on a sound financial footing, but that doesn't happen by accident. It is down to the direction set by the administration and the diligence of officers keeping tight rein of budgets. I too would like to thank the finance team, headed by our Section 151 officer Paul O'Donoghue and his deputy Paul Swindles. I'd like to thank the Chief Executive, the senior management team and all budget holders. Mr Mayor, I commend this budget and I have a seconder. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Fazakerley.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. It gives me great pleasure to second the budget.
In accordance with the Budget Council procedure rules, at this point in proceedings, I ask firstly the Leader of the Opposition if she could indicate whether she intends to move an amendment or propose an alternative budget.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Yes, I do intend to make 2 amendments.
Thank you.
Would you like me to deal with that now?
No.
Okay.
Thank you, Councillor Olds.
Thank you.
Could the Leader of the Liberal Democrats and any of the non-aligned members please indicate whether they wish to propose an amendment or alternative budget? Do any other councillors wish to propose any amendments? I have one amendment I wish to propose, which we'll deal with last. We now debate the substantive motion that's been proposed and seconded. Do we have any speakers on the substantive motion? Can you keep your hands up, please? I'll just make a note. Councillor Small.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. I'm standing to support this budget, not because it comes from this side of the chamber, but because it is a good budget. Why is it good? Because it reinforces this council's reputation as a well-run authority with a sound financial base that allows growth and development items at the same time, whilst providing good value for money for the residents of Fylde. The committee I serve on is operational management. It is by nature of its work a very high spending committee. A number of the key areas have been down to the council being very successful in bidding for grants. But this has meant that residents can see major activity going on to improve the environment. The Coastal Protection Scheme is the highest profile project, attracting over £22 million in grant. But additional funding of work such as the promenade seating, information and attraction points means that this will be a major importance both to residents and visitors over the next few years, enhancing our reputation as a wonderful place to both live and to visit. Our refuse, waste and recycling teams deservedly get plaudits for the quality of the service offered. Ongoing investments in new vehicles has meant that the fleet benefits from new technologies as well as being environmentally more friendly. It is what our residents asked for and it's what is being delivered. One last point here, green waste subscriptions have again been pegged at £30, one of the lowest charges. The increasing popularity of this shows that residents recognise they're getting good value for their money. For those who know the Snowdon Road depot, the site currently is operating from porta cabins designed as a temporary measure. This year, it is intended to upgrade facilities for all staff to enable it to become a more efficient base for increased activity. Turning to car parking, there will be investments at North Beach offering toilet and sluice facilities for users, and the new barrier scheme will be installed at Stanner Bank once the coastal works have been completed. There will be street enhancements from St Anne's Road West to the promenade, providing an enhanced gateway for both residents and tourists alike. In conclusion, I think this clearly demonstrates that Fylde is being proactive in both attracting huge inward investments as well as using its own resources to improve and enhance service, facilities and the environment for all. It is a good budget worthy of your support. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Small. Councillor Singleton.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm very pleased with the Treasury Management policy shown on Appendix G of tonight's papers, that the £1 million in borrowings that's outstanding will be repaid during December of this financial year. This will leave Fylde Council one of the few debt-free councils today, and I think this is something to be proud of. And again, my thanks go to the Finance Committee and the Finance team. But more importantly, Mr. Mayor, on a personal level, I'm pleased to see that the continuation of the Community Projects Fund for certainly another 12 months in this budget, because this no doubt provides a lifeline to many community volunteer groups such as Food Bank, In Bloom groups, village halls, scout groups, bowling clubs, even train stations. And I, like you, Mr. Mayor, have sat on this committee, this project committee, and have been pleased to assist with the community grants for Singleton, Kirkham, Freckleton, Ellswick, Ansdell, Lytham, St Anne's. My own area of Staining and Wheaton have benefited from grants in Staining in Bloom and the wildlife area, and over at Wheaton in the youth club. So I'm happy to support this budget. While I am on my feet, Mr. Mayor, we have a friends group in Staining, Friends of Open Spaces, and we completed a 10-point plan. We were successful in securing £50,000 from this council for the drainage of the field development. So that has gone to good use. And that's all I wish to say at the moment, Mr. Mayor. Thank you.
Mr.
Mr Mayor, point of order. Ellsworth has not received any grants in this project. Pick one. We do things ourselves.
Can I have all comments through the chair, please? If you want to speak, please indicate. I've got a list of people who wish to speak. Thank you. Councillor Pittman.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I certainly support everything that Councillor Small has said with regard to the operational management budget for 2019-20. I would also add that the money that has been earmarked for the coastal strip is money well spent, and it is not money that will just benefit Lytham, St Anne's. It is money that will benefit all residents in Fylde, rural as well as in the towns, because we are one borough and basically we need to think about the facilities that we enjoy and that we have subscribed to. So I would hope that the rural parishes do regard that the investment in our coastline is one that they can share as well, because basically we all should enjoy the wonderful facilities and the view that we have from this part of the coastline. And I'm looking forward to seeing the opening of the promenade from Red Scar. And lots of people are really also anticipating that walkway. And certainly when the public realm enhancements have been installed, it will be an absolutely splendid area to visit. All of us can visit, not just the people in Lytham and St Anne's. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Pittman. Can I have Councillor Thomas, please?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'm sure I speak on behalf of my fellow councillors from Lytham, in particular the two wards of Clifton and St John's, in applauding and welcoming this proposal for Lytham. It's part of the regeneration scheme, and any form of regeneration surely should always be seen as an investment in the particular town or area, as for the whole of Fylde itself. Obviously, we're pleased that there's been other funding in the areas of St Anne's, of Kirkham and Ansdell that received capital spend in recent years. But it's also nice to see, I'm very pleased in fact, to see that part of this superb budget, it does include this regeneration within Lytham itself. Lytham attracts thousands of people. It serves thousands of people, not only local, but tourists that come to Lytham. And this regeneration scheme, certainly linking the centre, the gateway to, for example, Lytham Hall, will be very welcomed. I therefore, Mr Mayor, wholly, heartily support this part of the budget indeed. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Thomas. Councillor Little.
Mr Mayor, I'm standing to support this administration's budget as chairman of the T&L committee. This year, the committee was asked to consider a revenue growth bid for event support. Members resolved to support the preparation of a revenue growth bid for additional resource to support the existing events programme and attract new events to generate income. Event organisation and delivery for key council events, including the Kite Festival, a team coordination role for seasonal out-of-hours coastal tourism services, and out-of-hours event attendance support to ensure third-party events are run properly and safely, and increased financial support to enable the International Kite Festival to be suitably managed by Fylde Council. I think we need to remember this event is free. The Kite Festival has grown significantly over the past 3 to 4 years, and the event is renowned internationally, and the scale has outgrown the third-party event. We also have had 126 events this last year. There have been third-party events which have hidden costs of health and safety, road closures, licensing, pollution, waste collection, promotion. These all are costs, but they all add to the visitor economy and the visitor experience. We've got capital bids, which have got the Coastal Explorers project, which is an art project, and that's 20,000 in respect of the Coastal Explorers project as part of the new scheme that's on Church Scar. Ashton Gardens Adventure Playground. We've got 20,000 capital bid for the replacement of play equipment at Ashton Gardens. We've got 30,000 for Ashton Gardens Nursery Depot improvements. Ashton Gardens is another of Fylde Council's significant heritage parks and continues to be very popular with residents and visitors. The gardens underwent a successful programme of restoration during 2009 and 10, predominantly funded by the Heritage Lottery Fund. But these works did not extend to the depot area. This area is a working operational depot serving Ashton Gardens team and some of the mobile teams undertaking ground maintenance operations in open spaces around St Anne's. Therefore, support for a new operational building to be built in the depot was agreed. And of course, it will improve safety and accessibility for staff and volunteers. Coastal signage improvements. Fylde Council's coastal strategy of 2015-2032 has a vision for the regeneration of Fylde's 18-kilometre coastline stretching from Stargate to Sarwick Brook. This area is divided into 6 coastal zones, including Star Hills, Dunes and Beaches, St Anne's on the Sea, Fairhaven Sand Dunes, Fairhaven Lake and Gardens and Granny's Bay, Lytham Heritage Coast, Wharton, Freckleton, Clifton and Lancaster Canal. The strategy covers a variety of issues, including green infrastructure, coastal protection, water quality, nature and landscape conservation, habitat improvement, heritage assets, placemaking, culture, leisure, sport and recreation. Along the coastline, there are a variety of signs associated with the issues serving a variety of purposes, including providing statutory information, safety warnings, promotion of facilities, interpretation regarding local points of interest, wayfinding and directional information, and enforcing local regulations. So we had some consultation on this, and as a result of the survey consultations, Fylde Council have been commissioned to develop a signage strategy for the Fylde coastal strip. And last is the access control measures at Blackpool North and St George's Field. Historically, 3 sites in St Anne's have been the focus of recent encampments in the travelling community: Frobisher Drive, Open Space and Blackpool North. In early 2018, timber bollards were installed on Frobisher Drive. And this approach proved successful in restricting access. So ward members have requested that the same approach be taken for Blackpool Road North, Plainfields and King George V Plainfields. So the T&L committee therefore supported a 15,000 capital bid to provide open access. I want to thank members of the T&L committee for supporting these, and I second or echo the comments of Councillor Buckley in this budget. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Little. Councillor Aitken, please.
This is a robust, sensible budget which fits into the corporate plan's value for money. I commend the budget, particularly the 3-year 670,000 plus 106 money planned for the regeneration of Lytham, which Councillor Thomas has already mentioned. We're looking forward to those 3 years of solid regeneration. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, Councillor Owens.
Carried away with the loving there. I'd like to place on record the thanks of all the councillors on this side of the chamber, to all our staff for continuing to work together to make council services more efficient, save money and maintain frontline services for our residents. And I'd especially like to thank our finance team who since 2011, with careful and prudent management, have taken the council from the brink of bankruptcy to the very healthy position it now enjoys with robust reserves and balances. But we do live in uncertain times, which hopefully, when Brexit is finally sorted out, we'll see become clearer. But we're warned that there is a high degree of uncertainty in relation to certain key areas of our budget. The introduction of the new arrangements for business rates looks promising for Fylde at the moment, but there is potential that Fylde could retain less of its business rate income in the future if the government introduce a less favourable split between lower and upper tier authorities. Also, the Fair Funding Review is currently being consulted on by government, which, if implemented, could be introduced in 2020. And although we don't have any detail at the moment, it's possible that we could see, given the financial pressures on upper tier and unitary councils with responsibility for services such as adult social care, that shire district councils will receive a reduced share of the national resources. Although the government has not introduced reform to the calculation of the new homes bonus this year, there is a possibility that they could do so in the future, which could reduce the amount that Fylde receive from the bonus. All three of these key areas are uncertain because of lack of information, clarity and certainty from the government, which makes it so difficult for councils to plan future services. One other factor which could have implications for the council is a review into the collection of green waste. The government is presently looking into councils collecting the waste free of charge in the future. As this council introduced charging for this service only 2 years ago and have received £535,500 from this service this year, this could have an adverse impact on our budget from 2022-23 onwards, yet more uncertainty. At this point, I'd like to give notice that I wish to move amendments. Okay, and I have an amendment, the first amendment, and I have a seconder for that. Okay? Okay, okay. I thought when I'd moved an amendment that had to be debated.
Councillor Redcliffe.
Well, it's always a pleasure to follow Councillor Rhodes, and it's perhaps opposite that this should be the case. The first comment that I want to make is that I suspect this year, as has been in a number of years now, that councils throughout the land, a number of councils that I've looked at, will be having far less positive debates about their financial position than the one that we are able to indulge in tonight. And I want to make this very important, forceful point, that there will always be differences of opinion and debates about, quite rightly in a democratic nation, that how particular money should be spent. But I'll tell you what, it's important to have the money first, to be able to have that debate. It's really important that you have a council that is actually being managed properly with prudent financial management, that at least gives our councillors, this council, working with officers, some choices. And I suspect, in fact I know because I've done some research, that a number of councils nationally this year forget talk about investing, forget talk about progressive schemes whereby there is a genuine effort to improve local communities. Rightly or wrongly, we live in difficult times, we know that, but there have been councils that have actually failed to live within their means, can't deliver value for money, or more bang for your buck, to quote a recently departed councillor. At least we are in the position, by proper management of our financial resources, to actually make decisions about whether we want to invest and how we want to invest, and how we want to improve our local communities. If you look at the planning committee remit, you'll see that there are a number of regeneration schemes mentioned there. Lytham, St Anne's, Kirkham, Ansdell. I'm a councillor for Ansdell. I've seen firsthand the impact that regeneration schemes can have, public realm schemes can have in the local community. I know sometimes these can be delivered through 106 and through other funding streams, but there's no doubt that this council has a proven and proud record of delivering public realm enhancements. In my own ward, I've quoted before, 36 units on Woodlands Road. Part of this, by the way, is in Fairhaven Ward as well. And if they're not currently occupied, I can tell you now, within weeks, they will be. There's an interest. There's a huge impetus given to the local community. So let's not take for granted the fact that we are actually members of a council that has created a situation where we can look at investment and improving not just what we have, but taking it a step further, and at the same time still delivering high quality services. The other thing I want to say is that there are a number of schemes mentioned there related to the planning committee, but the Future High Street Fund, as Councillor Rhodes will know, because she spoke very powerfully at the last planning committee and persuaded the planning committee that that is where the bid should be. Now, that planning committee supported that particular bid. And I just want to say, good luck with that as you work with the officers and with your Kirkham Business Partnership and any other groups that are interested, the Town Council, and I hope you are successful. And I hope it will achieve what you set out to achieve, and that is the regeneration of the High Street. Let's not take for granted, though, the situation that we have. It is, I know Councillor Nulty will probably say, I was one of the people that wasn't particularly happy at that time. But if you remember, I made it quite clear that I was not happy with the process rather than the outcome. And I congratulate, actually, Kirkham on taking the initiative, on being on the front foot, and grabbing the opportunity while it was there. Good luck. It's a good budget. I commend it.
Councillor Settle, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This will be quite a brief statement, actually. Just on one point, can I echo Councillor Little's comments regarding the Kite Festival? Or should I say the International Kite Festival? In a mere 6 years, it's grown to be the biggest UK event for kiting, and the amount of publicity that this borough gets is actually phenomenal. And this year, we're hoping to actually get a Guinness World Record, bringing the biggest kite in the world from Kuwait onto a beach here. And the amount of business that generates over the weekend is phenomenal for our local businesses, all helping them to pay their business rates. So thank you very much, Council, for proposing to take over the management. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Harvey, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And I think I just heard a groan from Councillor Mulholland, actually, as I stood up there. I do have quite good hearing, Councillor Mulholland, so you'll be pleased to know that I'm not going to speak very long. In fact, I'll be very brief. No, indeed, I will be.
Can we have some order, please?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd just like to say I think that Councillor Redcliffe spoke very eloquently a moment ago. But I mean, obviously I'm rising to support the budget. I'd just like to focus councillors' attention if I may, on the comments of our Chief Financial Officer at pages 42 and 43 of the report. Yes, we can debate little bits and bobs of the budget, but the Chief Financial Officer's overall conclusions are that the forecast financial position of the Council has improved since the budget was set last March 2018, and the finances of the Council remain robust. And he goes on to say that having considered the major items of expenditure and income, and also their sensitivity to change, together with the savings and growth proposals and their impact on the Council's future forecasts and level of reserves, it is his view that the recommendations contained in this report provide the Council with a robust financial position, at least for a number of years, on the basis of the assumptions set out in the report. And Councillor Rhodes made reference to some risks, and I think it was right to do so. But those risks are covered off in the report in sections 11 and 14. And even taking into account those risks that I think we're all aware of, except possibly with the exception of the waste that you mentioned, but I don't think there are any clear proposals on that yet, and there won't be for a number of years, so it's difficult to factor that in. Even acknowledging those risks which Councillor Rhodes mentioned, it's the Chief Financial Officer's position that the Council has the processes and procedures in place to monitor those risks in order to take effective remedial action should the need arise. So on that basis, I've every confidence in supporting the recommendations tonight and in supporting this budget, and I think that councillors should pay great attention to those professional opinions from our Chief Financial Officer in supporting this budget. Thank you.
Do any other councillors wish to speak to the substantive motion? Councillor Fiddler.
Thank you. I'm in between the two speakers and I'm going to show them just how you can be brief. Daily you hear comments about austerity. I never understood the context that it's used, usually to cover up people spending more than they should. And the one point I want to emphasise from Councillor Buckley's presentation was how many councils can boast that the cost of running an administration in 2019 is 10% less than it was in 2010. My guess would be that extremely few councils can have a similar boast, and that's as simple as that.
That was brief.
Thank you. Are there any other councillors wish to speak on the substantive motion? Councillor Buckley, do you wish to sum up? We will now take the amendments in order. Councillor Rhodes.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Well, the first amendment is in relation to the revenue budget, and I would like to move that the £46,000 shown in the revenue budget from 2019-20 onwards to support an events coordinator and provide financial support towards the cost of the St Anne's Kite Festival be removed, and that in future any increase to our staffing establishments be first evaluated by the management team and right sizing group. Unfortunately, this proposal doesn't break down how much of the £46,000 will be spent on an events coordinator and how much will be spent on the Kite Festival. And whilst I'm happy for the Kite Festival to get funding, there are other avenues where funding can be accessed for this purpose. The MTFS refers to the fact that over the period of this council, savings have been made by reducing back office costs, a measure which has been deemed necessary to right-size the council. And that's one of the reasons that we are in such a good position. I think our management team have looked very carefully and made sure that they have right-sized the authority. This proposal suggests increasing back office costs, and funding an officer will increase year on year, so over time will presumably cost more. Whilst I'm not opposed to increasing back office costs if it is felt necessary to support services to all our residents, I feel that it should first be fully evaluated by the management team, which I don't believe has been done in this case. This proposal has, I think, come from the T&L committee as something they'd like to have. And whilst I respect the fact that they feel it's important, I believe that if we're starting to increase staffing levels, then we should look at the council as a whole to see where there is the greatest need for an officer to improve services across the borough. I've actually asked the management team where, if they were given extra funding to increase the staffing resource, they would use it. And the answer was, quite simply, enforcement. I'd ask you all to consider this in relation to your wards and its residents. Most of the complaints I and my colleagues receive relate to enforcement, not just planning enforcement, but also dog fouling, noise, smells, parking. There are simply not enough enforcement officers to deal with the volume of complaints. What do you all do at weekends when people contact you because they're upset about nuisance? Do you expect officers to just be available? Do you look for emergency numbers, or do you simply interrupt officers' leisure time? An events coordinator may help to increase the number of events being created, primarily in the urban areas, but by how much? As there are already a number of events being staged, and we've heard how many from the chairman of T&L, there's surely a limit to any increase which could be achieved. I believe that any increase in staffing establishment must be evaluated by the management team to ensure that the resource is provided to the area of the council in most need to improve service delivery to all residents of the borough. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Do you have a seconder? Councillor Nolte.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, I'm happy to second this amendment, and I would like to reserve my right to speak. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any speakers on this amendment?
Yeah.
Councillor Little.
Thank you. The Tourism and Leisure Committee meeting on the 8th of November 2018 agreed to support the revenue bid in the sum of £46,000 per annum from 2019-20 onwards to provide additional resources to support events. And as I explained earlier in my remit, the event organisation and delivery for key council events, including the Kite Festival. These will include people, staff that can be met in the morning and say, where can we go today, and go to certain areas and make the running of its health and safety and make the visitor experience really a pleasurable one. So a team of coordination role of seasonal out of hours and coastal tourism services can help make this a visitor experience really pleasurable. Thank you.
Councillor Mulholland.
That was completely unconvincing. I'm not quite sure they understood what was being said, and on the basis of that, there's no way that I could vote for this. Is it possible that this could be? I mean, I'm quite sure that that this will, the advice will be to just vote ahead, push it through. But that really was not at all convincing, and I would much prefer that this was just kept out, and we were given the chance for more discussion on it, more debate on it. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Ashton.
I've got to agree with Councillor Mulholland. Councillor Rhodes was not convincing at all. I don't think we should support this amendment, because that's what he was saying, and I wholeheartedly agree with him. That's the first and probably last time that I'll agree with Councillor Mulholland during this term. So, an events coordinator and supporting the St Anne's Kite Festival. To me, extremely important roles and functions for this borough. They raise the profile of not only St Anne's, Lytham St Anne's, but the whole of the Fylde Peninsula. So they're very valuable to us. Secondly, they will improve the income and money spent in our towns and villages. When you talk to our traders, this is what they want from us as a borough council. They want us to support events, bring more people into the borough, including the rural areas. They won't be excluded. So they benefit the whole of the borough. Now, moving on to the amendment, Councillor Rhodes mentioned management team at least 3 times. But I've got some news for Councillor Rhodes. The management team don't run this authority. The authority is run by the Conservatives on this side of the chamber. And unfortunately, Councillor Rhodes, you're not going to be successful in your amendment, because we are going to get what we perceive as the priorities for this borough, because we care about the whole borough, not just Kirkham. We care about Lytham St Anne's and the rural areas. So, colleagues, I hope you'll join me in voting down this amendment. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. And Councillor Settle.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. When I spoke about the Kite Festival earlier, I mentioned the local businesses. The comments I get back from the businesses, particularly the hotels on the frontier and the restaurants and the cafes, are that this is their biggest weekend of the year, and they absolutely rely on this for a lot of their profits. The fact that they're making good profits means that they can actually then pay their business rates, which then helps our council. So it gives us a strong financial position. Without this sort of event, and I do hope we have more of these events, some of these businesses might struggle to pay their business rates, and none of us want that. Thank you.
Councillor Small.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm going to be very brief. Fylde is a tourist borough. We depend upon tourists. Tourists bring money, revenue in. They spend money in the shops, they spend money on recreational things, they stay in hotels. That in turn helps the local economy. That's why we need these kind of events. And I know that the team has been very pushed in recent years, and this is designed to actually support and assist that team in putting on high quality events that bring in large numbers. All you have to do is to go to any events over the summer and see the distances that people are coming from to come to the Fylde. And bringing money into this borough in terms of tourists and the tourist pound helps and assists all of us. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Silverwood.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Well, I agree with Councillor Mulholland. I was trying to get my head around what Councillor Little was trying to say. I was confused when she said that it would be the role of the new tourism officer to decide on the day what to do. Well, if that were the case, then I'd say that they were very poor at the job, because obviously any events needs a lot of forward planning. Councillor Rhodes referred to the management team 3 times, as Councillor Ashton said. I think it's extremely arrogant of him to say that it's the Conservatives that run the shop. And if it were not for our finance team, as we're all very keen to thank this evening, we wouldn't be in the position that we're in now. So it's certainly not down to the Conservatives on that side of the chamber to make all the decisions. The officers are here to advise us. The management team are here to advise us. And as Councillor Rose pointed out, we're desperately lacking in the enforcement area. And as it's not just planning, as she said, it's dog fouling, it's noise, it's pollution. This is what we hear about all the time. This is what affects the quality of the lives of our residents across the borough. Yes, people attending events, going to the hotels, and yes, Councillor Settle, it does pay the business rates, but we're supposed to be a council that looks after the whole of the borough. Councillor Small said this before. I'm sorry, but with the best will in the world, a festival, a kite festival, and a tourism officer is looking purely at this area of Lytham St Anne's. It is not taking care of the whole of the borough in which an enforcement officer would. And surely, as councillors, we should respect what our management team are telling us. If they need enforcement officers, that's where the money should be going, not tourism officers.
Thank you. Councillor Pittman.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I would certainly support what Councillor Settle has said about the need for an events coordinator. Not very long ago, I picked up A4 posters of events that were intended for North Lancashire resorts, and basically I realised that it is becoming increasingly competitive. Our neighbouring resorts are well organised and can fill virtually every weekend with an event. Now, if this is the state of play with regard to tourism, and our neighbouring authorities are well aware of the business that it creates, we cannot be on the back foot. We do have to respond, and I would certainly support the need for an events coordinator if we are going to go forward in this very competitive area of Fyldes work. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Redcliffe.
Thank you for that greeting. I understand. I think we're missing something. I mean, 2 points I'm going to make. One, if you have a natural resource that is of value to the area that you represent, that is Fylde, it would seem to me to maximise the potential of that particular attribute, that particular resource. In other words, absolutely develop it to its fullest potential. If you are doing that, and that involves a degree of sophisticated coordination, which an events coordinator would hopefully on a professional level be able to deliver, it makes what we're doing more effective and allows the organisations and events that have already evolved to develop and actually become better and more successful. But actually the second point that I'm going to make is that it isn't just about visitors. These events are actually supported and visited by an awful lot of local people, many of whom live in the rural Fylde, who love a trip to the seaside and love to take part in these particular events. And can I say also that I think we should be continuing to look at the potential for rural Fylde tourism. And that can be part of the remit of an events coordinator as well. I would be delighted if the events coordinator that is employed was partly busy organising events and helping to coordinate events in the rural Fylde. I'd give it 3 cheers and support it.
Yes,
I tell you what, if you don't have a coordination, you don't have a successful tourism and leisure setup. And I think it's investing in the future and ensuring that these events are here to stay, and not only that, are going to get better.
Thank you. Do we have any other speakers on this amendment? Councillor Nulty.
Okay, thank you. I think Councillor Redcliffe was right. I think we are missing something here, because the amendment wasn't just about the events officer. So before I come on to the events officer specifically, I completely understand the concept of putting money away for a rainy day, which this council has done for several years now. But I can guarantee that almost every councillor here has had complaints on a regular basis of lack of enforcement or something similar. Conditions on development not being complied with, illegal signs all over the borough, other planning issues, etc. So, do we continue to put quite large amounts of money away for a rainy day whilst the roof continues to leak in some areas? All I would ask, and what the amendment is asking, is that the budget right-sizing group, together with professional advice from the management team, meet again as soon as possible to ensure that all departments have sufficient capacity to deal with the problems so often complained of, not just a specific area to be covered by this events officer proposal. If this does go ahead, as I'm sure it will, we must all be made aware of what aspects are covered by this post holder, and that it covers much more than just the Kite Festival. Most people here tonight have simply talked about the Kite Festival, which I accept is popular and successful and deserves support. But we need assurances that the post holder will devote a good amount of time to developing and enhancing the tourism officer in the rural areas, as well as the coastal strip. Councillor Little has only referred to the coastal strip. We have Ribby Hall that's very successful in the rural area. Very, very successful. I would argue more successful than most things that go on in St Anne's and around it. So I'm sure that could do with some, could benefit from some support and extra help. Also, before it's decided to delay filling a vacancy under the Vacancy Delay Savings Scheme, it's imperative that no part of any service will suffer. I've asked questions on both these areas before and always been assured that this is what happens. Everybody looks very carefully and vacancies are filled when necessary. But certainly in our rural part of the borough, we're constantly waiting for action from some service or other, though most particularly on planning issues. The council is proposing to increase the amount we collect in council tax from our constituents, and we have very large reserves in both general and earmarked reserves. It's only fair that we ensure that we can deliver services as promised, not just helping out with wonderful events. The Corporate Priority Plan identifies enforcement on the Great Places to Live. We don't seem to have enough enforcement officers. We need to continuously review services to improve efficiency and effectiveness, manage finances, champion the reputation of Fylde, all under value for money and the clean and green priorities. Efficiency means working effectively, ensuring all our services are delivered properly. It does not mean saving more money to stash away. So let's make sure that we're delivering what we should, please. It may be an events officer, it may be an extra enforcement officer. We may need both. So please consider this amendment, which simply means looking at what we do very carefully, where we put our money, and it may even mean adding to this budget later in the year and adjusting it. I'm happy to second this amendment.
Thank you. Do we have any other speakers on this amendment? Could I ask Councillor Buckley if she wishes to sum up?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I do think it has been said for many, many reasons that this amendment is short-sighted to not support the ongoing development of events which are so important to this borough, and I do want to echo right across this borough, for residents of this borough to enjoy. then I think that is short-sighted. Also, my understanding is that an extra member of staff will be able to access those grants, those funds, those bids to bring in money into Fylde to further develop the events that we all enjoy and are of great success for visitors to this area. It is not true at all to say there's no events in rural Fylde. First, straight away springs to mind the Fylde Vintage Farm Show that we support as an event in rural Fylde. And I do hope that that goes from strength to strength and that we can do more for that. But I do question, where were members? Where were members when this came to T&L? This has been through the committee system. This has been through Tourism and Leisure. Members, where was Councillor Rose? She could have come to that committee. She has the right to speak and ask questions of that committee. So where were members raising those arguments at the relevant point when they'd rather just use them at Budget Council? Thank you.
Before we take the vote on this amendment, Alice, the Chief Executive to read out the amendment for clarity. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. The amendment refers to the revenue budget, and the amendment is that the £46,000 shown in the revenue budget from 2019-20 onwards to support an events coordinator and provide financial support towards the cost of the St Anne's Kite Festival be removed, and that in future any increase to our staffing establishment be first evaluated by management team and right sizing group.
We'll now have a recorded vote.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. If members could indicate, please, if they are for the amendment, against the amendment or abstaining. Councillor Aitken.
Against.
Councillor Anthony.
Against.
Councillor Ashton.
Against.
Councillor Blackshaw.
Against.
Councillor Buckley.
Against.
Councillor Chew.
For.
Councillor Clayton.
For.
Councillor Delma Collins. Councillor Corner. Councillor Dixon. Councillor Donaldson.
Against.
Councillor Fazakerley.
Against.
Councillor Fiddler.
Against.
Councillor Ford. Councillor Green.
Against.
Councillor Harvey.
Against.
Councillor Jakes.
Against.
Councillor Kirkham. Councillor Little.
Against.
Councillor Lloyd. Councillor Edward Nash.
Against.
Councillor, against. I'll come back to Councillor Mulholland in a moment. Councillor Sally Nash. Councillor Kieran Mulholland. Sorry.
It's because you left. Came back.
Okay. Councillor Nixon.
Against.
Councillor Nolte. Councillor Oates. Councillor Pittman.
Against.
Councillor Redcliffe.
Against.
Councillor Rigby. Abstain. Councillor Settle.
Against.
Councillor Silverwood.
For.
Councillor Singleton.
Against.
Councillor Small.
Against.
Councillor Speak. Councillor Thomas. Councillor Wilder.
Against.
And Councillor Collins, the Mayor.
For.
Okay. The amendment is lost. 27 against, 8 for and 2 abstentions, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. Can I call on Councillor Rhodes to move her second amendment, please?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Amendment 2 is A, that in future an equality impact assessment is carried out on the capital budget to ensure that capital funding is shared throughout the borough in an equitable manner, and B, that all town and parish councils be advised when and how to submit any capital bids in order that they may be assessed in a timely manner in order to be considered each year for inclusion in the budget. The population of the rural Fylde makes up 41% of the population of this borough, whilst obviously Lytham St Anne's makes up 59%. Between 2015 and 2020, the total cost of capital schemes has been £3,780,000. Of this, 34% has been spent on items common to all areas of the borough, such as bin wagons, the cemetery, bus shelters, etc. 59% has been spent in Lytham St Anne's, whilst only 7% of the total has been spent in the rural Fylde. This, I believe, is inequitable and disproportionately disadvantages the rural Fylde compared to Lytham St Anne's. I believe that this is as a result of the budget working group comprising of all Lytham St Anne's councillors, with the exception of one rural member who, I'm advised, is not always able to attend the meetings of the group. The rural voice is therefore underrepresented and on occasions totally silent. Very often, schemes in the rural Fylde have to depend on Section 106 funding, if they're lucky enough to have any, to improve their areas, with sometimes small contributions from Fylde's Capital Fund. Today, we see a small amount earmarked for staining, which I welcome. But I've heard discontent about this from some Lytham St Anne's councillors. As I've already said, 41% of the rural Fylde contributes to the Capital Fund, but only 7% has been spent in those areas over the last 5 years. Whoever is in charge of the borough after the election must stop this inequality and put in place a system which ensures fairness across the whole borough.
Thank you. Do you have a seconder for this item?
Mr Mayor, I stand to second the amendment and reserve my right to speak. Thank you.
Thank you. Do you have any speakers on this amendment? Councillor Fazakerley.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I think I must be missing something here, because as far as I know, and I've had a lot of years on this council now, and I've had quite a number of years on the budget working group, there is absolutely nothing to stop any member, rural or urban, coming up with a request for a capital scheme to be considered. We don't get them. I don't know why we don't get them, but they're not forthcoming. In this recent round of budget working groups negotiations, we have had a list of projects, capital projects, from a non-conservative urban member, and the budget working group approved several of those projects. But all I can say to my colleagues on the right is, we're not mind readers. If they have capital projects that they would like to come to be discussed, please submit them. I can't understand why they don't. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Councillor Speak.
Thank you, Mr Mayor, and I'd like to thank the leader for making them remarks, and I'm as guilty as anybody else in the rural areas. I have absolutely no idea where to start and where to get advice on any capital schemes in the rural areas. The area I represent, Newton and Trails, as you know, covers a large area of this borough, and I would welcome officer input. I would welcome any help and guidance from any of the committees that help sort out capital funding, and especially ideas as to how we can improve our rural areas, not just for Trails, Roger and Wallace, but also Newton, Clifton and Solwick. We get so little from this borough in respect of finances and help, and I would greatly appreciate that advice and help, and especially officer time. Thank you.
Councillor Nolte. Thank you.
Yeah, I am very pleased to support this amendment. There must be equality and parity across both urban and rural communities. I'm so pleased that those in Lytham St Anne's are looking forward to 3 years of regeneration across Lytham and St Anne's. Unfortunately, we aren't. The urban core of Lytham St Anne's makes up 59% of the population, with rural areas at 41%. But most likely this percentage will rise with the amount of development currently taking place. So it will be a more even split. However, the percentage of capital spend comes nowhere near the split, being only 7% spent on schemes in the rural part of the borough. Even that capital spend is only occurring in 2 communities, Kirkham and Staining, where some finance is being put in to enhance what is already being funded by the Section 106 monies received on the back of development in those areas. I wish we could be as happy as those councillors in Lytham St Anne's are looking. In my ward, Medlar with Wesson, and it has been flagged up and it does get flagged up, we have a scheme ready to go with Section 106 public realm money waiting to fund it. This scheme has stayed in the same position for the last 12 months, and you can believe me or you can not, but you can ask the officers, due to lack of officer time being available to progress it, to assess costings and get it ready to go to committee for approval. We could have put this forward as a scheme to go forward into the capital for extra money, but we can't even get any costings to know if we need any funding to go towards that public realm scheme. Do our rural taxpayers expect that they are adding to capital funding and capital funding reserves to ensure that visitors in Lytham St Anne's enjoy smooth pavements and fancy lighting, while rural areas fail to have any improvements, even when money has been received because of development? We have no idea what is being proposed by the Budget Working Group, who meet in secret. We have no input from this side and most of the rural area. I don't think there's there is one rural member on it, but we don't get told what is going forward in the group. So how are we supposed to know what is going? We have no officer input into trying to get schemes to go forward. I think our rural taxpayers would be horrified to learn the amount of money. I don't think many people look at it, but I think the rural members would be horrified to know that all this money is going into the urban core, whilst we're taking so much development and getting very, very little. And all that is through Section 106 money. The council must put this right. I'm very happy to support this amendment and look forward to more equality and parity in the next iteration of this council. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any more speakers on this amendment? Councillor Silverwood.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Before I speak to the amendment, I too would like to thank Paul O'Donoghue and his team for the continued hard work and diligence in taking care of the council's finances. Due to their tenacity and sometimes use of the crystal ball, we find ourselves in robust health with our reserves and balances. The budget consultation information was, as each year, sent to the stakeholders mid-February. How far and wide that actually is, I'm not sure. The email says all councillors, the MP and town and parish clerks. The timescale involved is unrealistic. To be provided with the information on the 12th of February and ask for feedback by the 20th means that the opportunity for people to respond is extremely restricted. Appendix K shows that there were only 2 respondents. Councillor Buckley did refer to this before. Singleton Parish Council expressing its disappointment that all the monies allocated are to the main coastal areas of the borough and nothing for the smaller rural parishes. Councillor Buckley mentioned the community funds, but we're actually talking about the capital growth list. This is what Appendix K comments were about. The second respondent is Little Eccleston with Larbrec Parish Council, who state that there was an agreement between the leader of the council and the chief exec in July 2017 that any changes, planning or otherwise, that have an effect on a town or parish council will be brought to the district parish liaison meeting, and this consultation was not brought to the DPLM. As Kirkham is in the throes of working on a bid for the Future High Streets Fund, so this is a government grant, this isn't from this council. Yes, we are getting officer time. We're on a highly pressured deadline date, and when Councillor Redcliffe referred to Councillor Oates before at the Planning Committee, it wasn't unanimous that Kirkham get the vote and the go-ahead for the Future High Streets Fund. So the fund is seeing many keen volunteers in the town helping to put the proposal together. I showed this document to Kirkham Business Group members, some residents, a local vicar, and other interested parties. And without exception, everyone I spoke to said, where are Kirkham and the Rural Fylde on this list? By this document, if some members haven't digested the information, even though it's been reeled out many times this evening, I mean the capital growth proposals for 1920. And just to remind everybody yet again, this list comprises of the Lytham Public Realm Regeneration Scheme, St Anne's Public Realm Regeneration Scheme, improved accommodation and facilities at the Council Depot at Snowdon Road, development and toilet facilities at North Beach Car Park, control and security measures at Stannerbank Car Park, improvements to the play area and nursery at Ashton Gardens, support for tree planting and coastal signage scheme, and for the proposed Coastal Explorers Public Arts Scheme. So nothing for Kirkham and the Rural Fylde is proposed in the capital growth list for the next financial year. I pointed out to those people I've spoken to that, of course, with an election round the corner, the election war chest has been opened to a tune of £985,000 just on this list alone. One of the businesses on the High Street that is helping give information to the Future High Streets bid is a former leader of the council. He fought every step of the way in denying Kirkham the opportunity to improve its public realm and tried on a number of occasions, happily failed, to introduce pay and display along with Councillor Ashton. Now that he has a business on the High Street, he's completely sympathetic to the position we were in and concedes that he now understands why we have to fight for everything to try and help our town and villages. Kirkham has a community that is incredibly proud of its town and local area, but is deprived the investment for its town and area simply because the Tories cannot secure a foothold in the Rural Fylde. It is way overdue that an equitable amount of the residents' 41% contribution to the capital fund is invested in the Rural Fylde instead of a paltry 7% that has been spent in the Rural Fylde over the past 5 years. Let's remember the vision for the borough in our corporate plan. Under the heading of vibrant economy, working with all partners, we will enhance and improve our town and village centres. This is an impossible commitment when not a single penny of the £985,000 that is proposed in our papers tonight is being earmarked for the Rural Fylde. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Do we have any further speakers on this? Oh, Councillor Mulholland, sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I had no idea what the amendments were going to be tonight, so they all take me by surprise. This one, I have to say, whilst I've not been prepared, I can't give figures and can't really think back. But what I can say is that I always have a fear that if there's a pot of money available and people are asked to sort of come forward with schemes, you know, that they may want to advance, that worries me, because people who haven't, you know, they've no schemes in mind, they've nothing in mind, that there's potentially nothing that their area needs, But of course they will all scurry away and try and think up of a scheme to spend it. And I remember in my early days on the council, nearly 30 years ago, I think it was the Blue Bus money, which was split throughout the borough. And a lot of people felt that large chunks of that had been frittered, really, and you know, not wisely used. And I've got to say, my experience has been that if somebody comes up with a good scheme, I've always found that officers respond. And in fairness, I know when Freckleton wanted 50,000 for its playground, in fact, it was supported by Conservatives and was not supported by the people I was hoping to get support from, which were my rural colleagues. So, you know, I have no complaints at all that if somebody comes up with a scheme, that it can be advanced, it can be forwarded, and if it's a good scheme, I do believe that my colleagues over there will look on that favourably, or attempt to look on it favourably. I mean, we haven't got an endless pit of money. But I've got to say, what does worry me is when you start instructing officers to come up with ideas or seeking out ideas. To my mind, if there's a need for something, if you've got a dream for something, that will already be there. You don't need to be told that there's a pot of money that you can have a scrabble at, because, you know, like I say, I have a feeling that often leads to people coming up with, let's say, schemes that maybe aren't needed or false schemes. And yes, the split between the borough, that's relevant, and I would like equity there. But overall, I think we're doing pretty well in that regard. So I'm afraid I can't vote for the amendment, and I will thank the Conservatives again on this occasion for the support when Freckleton has needed schemes to be put through. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Redcliffe.
To think we've just refreshingly heard an example of that sort of blows out of the water some of the arguments that we've heard. It's always difficult when you look at percentages and how you arrive at those and the statistics. And most people would probably say, okay, there is a difference there. My feeling would be, I agree with much of what Councillor Mulholland has said, but we had a similar debate, if you remember, on the Planning Committee, didn't we, about the Future High Street Fund. And my view was that, and I heard Councillor speak earlier on, ask for officers for support and advice, etc., which I think is fine, but actually from somewhere, from somebody, from within the community, at some point, there has to be some vision and scope for a scheme. There has to be somewhere the kernel of an idea that is going to be taken forward by communities in the rural file and actually filtered into the process. And all right, okay, accept that. What I'm saying is that with the Future High Street Fund, that was all right, that wasn't Fylde Council money, but you got your act together ahead of St Anne's and Lytham and other communities, and you presented a case which then persuaded the planning committee, and you're on your way. Now, if that initiative could be replicated in terms of seeking out projects that are within the remit of Fylde Council, I would, and I don't mean this in a patronising way, I'm simply saying that if that was replicated, I would imagine you would have greater success. I would hope that you would, in terms of attracting funding. And I'm putting that forward as a positive suggestion.
Thank you. Do we have any further speakers? Councillor Singleton.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. As I said before, and just following on from Councillor Mulholland's statement, we also thank the Fylde Council for our grant for £50,000 towards the field development. But more than that, although we haven't submitted a capital budget yet, we are working with the Flood Action Group from Lancashire County Council and an engineer from Fylde Council to identify the causes of flooding. And when we're certain of the causes of the flooding, we will be coming along to Fylde Borough Council for some assistance. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Any more speakers on this amendment? Can I invite Councillor Buckley to sum up?
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. I think Councillor Mulholland hit the nail on the head. To artificially allocate funds in terms of population would lead, without a vision of a scheme, would lead to that same old practice of when people had budgets and you're told, well, you better spend your budget before the end of the year, otherwise you won't get it again, and budgets were rolled over. Now, Councillor Oates supported the budget right-sizing scheme that we have here in Fylde and congratulated the management team for implementing that. But I must say to Councillor Oates, that wasn't an officer suggestion, it was a member suggestion that brought to an end any rolling over of budgets. So schemes have to be supported, I believe, on their merit. And I also think that it is right to say that our council, Conservative-run council, has supported a bid to the High Street Fund for Kirkham, a committee that is the majority held by Conservatives. Has supported a bid to the High Street Fund for Kirkham. And yes, it's a government fund, and that's a Conservative government fund. We hear the argument again, the same argument about a rural-urban divide, which I don't agree with, and I actually think is disingenuous, and I'll tell you the reasons why. It's a historical argument. It's one that may perhaps extend back to 1974 when Fylde Borough was formed with the merger of Lytham St Anne's Kirkham Urban District and Fylde Rural District. At that time, many of the rural areas retained their own assets and are overseen by their parishes. But Kirkham and Lytham St Anne's assets were dealt with differently, and therefore Fylde Borough Council had an obligation for their upkeep. However, in 2012, Kirkham Town Council's request for a transfer of the open spaces to them was agreed by this council, together with a capital grant of £110,000. Further, in 2016, their request for Kirkham car parks owned by Fylde Borough Council to be transferred to Kirkham Town Council free of charge was also agreed. So we hand over assets that are requested and then receive complaints that we don't continue to spend money on them. As a result of these transfers, the assets which Fylde owns and is directly responsible for are largely across Lytham St Anne's. But it is important to acknowledge, which is where the opposition let themselves down, that they can be enjoyed by all residents of the borough and visitors to Fylde. For instance, when you look at the investment to allow the pavilion, to name one particular grant, whilst it is situated in Lytham, it is the only theatre in Fylde and is enjoyed by all of us. You can say the same about Fairhaven Lake, which is such an important attraction for visitors. That is why it is a short-sighted argument and one that is simply politically motivated to complain of capital expenditure in terms of only geography. It is also incorrect to say that we have not supported rural areas, as you've heard from members this evening. And let me remind you of a few budget proposals by this administration which directly affect rural Fylde. In 15-16, we proposed a capital grant to Freckleton for the Memorial Park. In 16-17, we proposed a capital grant to Wharton for the redevelopment of their park. In 18-19, we proposed a capital grant to Staining to aid their park plans. And let's not forget, as I've mentioned before, the offer to assist Friends of Parks groups across the whole of Fylde has been made and repeated, and yet is not often taken up. In terms of Kirkham, as a market town serving the rural areas, we have invested in numerous years to the phased regeneration plans of their high street, and the last capital grant was in 17-18. For all those reasons, Mr Mayor, I say that the argument is disingenuous and I cannot support the amendment. Thank you.
Thank you. Could I ask for quiet when speakers are speaking, please? Can I ask the Chief Executive to read out the second amendment before we take the vote on it?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. And there are two parts to this amendment. Part A is that in future an equality impact assessment is carried out on the capital budget to ensure that capital funding is shared throughout the borough in an equitable manner. And Part B, that all town and parish councils be advised when and how to submit any capital bids in order that they may be assessed in a timely manner in order to be considered each year for inclusion in the budget.
We will now take a recorded vote on this amendment.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. If members could indicate if they're for or against the amendment or abstaining, please. Councillor Aitken.
Against.
Councillor Ashton. Councillor Blackshaw. Councillor Buckley. Councillor Chu. Councillor Clayton. Councillor Delma Collins. Councillor Corner. Councillor Dixon. Councillor Donaldson. Councillor Fazakerley. Councillor Fiddler. Councillor Ford. Councillor Green. Councillor Harvey. Councillor Jakes. Councillor Kirkham. Councillor Little. Councillor Lloyd. Councillor Mulholland. Councillor Edward Nash. Councillor Sally Nash. Councillor Nixon. Councillor Nolte. Councillor Oates. Councillor Pittman. Councillor Redcliffe. Councillor Rigby. Councillor Settle. Councillor Silverwood. Councillor Singleton. Councillor Small. Councillor Speak. Councillor Thomas. Councillor Wilder. Councillor Collins, the Mayor.
For.
6, 28.
The amendment is lost. 28 against, 6 for and 2 abstentions.
Can I ask if any other member has an amendment they wish to propose? I gave notice of an amendment I wish to make. I propose an additional recommendation, in addition to those on the order papers, that the positions of Leader of the Council and Deputy Leader of the Council be removed as soon as possible after the forthcoming elections, thereby making an annual saving of £13,000.
Mr Mayor, can I ask a question, please? As Mayor, could you show me the governance which allows a Mayor, who should be neutral, to put forward an amendment to any proposal which is put to this group of people?
Thank you. I've given the amendment to officers prior to the meeting. I haven't received any advice that it's not a valid amendment. And this isn't personal or political. No one knows the outcome of the elections or which political group, if any, will be in control of the council or who will be elected leader of the council. This is simply a measure that will cut unjustifiable expense by this council of £13,000 per annum in special responsibility allowances. What special responsibilities does the leader have? They are confined to answering or choosing to another member to answer questions from members of the public at council meetings. That is it. That is all that's in the Constitution. The leader might have had far more responsibilities under the cabinet system, but not now. And it is not comparing like with like to compare what the leader of this council receives to what leaders of other councils operating the cabinet system receive. So, how many questions have been asked by members of the public over the last 4 years? A grand total of 8. 2 per year on average. So that is 6,500 per question. Not for answering the question, but deciding who will answer the question. 6 of the 8 questions have been answered by the chairs of committees and 2 by the leader. Deciding who is to answer a question is not particularly demanding. Questions about subscriptions to the green bins have been delegated to the chair of operational management. Planning issues to the chair of the planning committee. The leader receives £10,000 per annum for having this responsibility. So what responsibilities does the deputy leader have? None other than to perform the duties of the leader should the leader be incapacitated. So £3,000 per annum for doing nothing or next to nothing. The Constitution could be amended quite simply to say that questions from members of the public are dealt with by the leader of the controlling group, effectively the same person. The leader may be a hard-working ward councillor, but no allowance is paid for that. The leader may have many duties as leader of the controlling group, but an allowance is paid for that. But the special responsibilities allowances paid for being the leader of the council is totally disproportionate and unjustifiable, especially at a time when grants and funding are being cut. This is £13,000 of the public purse. I don't know if I've got a seconder to this. No, I'll ask. Councillor Silverwood.
Mr Mayor, I'll stand to second your amendment and reserve the right to speak if necessary.
Councillor Harvey.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I don't know whether you've taken us by surprise or not with that, really. I mean, I do remember we've had a similar motion before full council before, which I believe was presented by Councillor Rhodes. But I'd just like to say, in my view, you said it yourself, and by doing so undermined your own amendment. What you said is that no one knows what the political landscape will look like after May the 2nd. Who will be leading the new administration? And I believe that that does undermine your own proposed amendment, because I don't think it would be right for us now, tonight, to bind the hands of whatever that new administration will be. I think that rightly that should be a matter for the new administration to consider, whether that be a Conservative-led administration or whether it be an independent-led coalition. That's a matter for the new regime to consider in the next budget. And if that's something that they want to do, then fine, they can take it ahead. But I don't think it would be right for the council tonight to bind the hands of a future administration in that way. And that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Mulholland.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Yeah, I'm sorry, I can't support this amendment because taken to its ultimate conclusion, you might as well just scrap all special responsibilities allowance, because if you want to narrow it down, well, what does the chairman get a responsibility allowance for? The only difference really is that they usually have a briefing. They needn't have a briefing. They can knock the briefing on the head if they want to. But I think you get into murky territory. Groups of leaders of groups. Are we going to sort of say, well, why do we give them anything? So at the end of the day, and we just got the budget in front of us. If you look at the money that it takes to run Fylde, Fylde Borough, and then you start picking at amounts like this for the 51 people that try to run the place, I really think it would be, even if there was an argument for the saving, I think it would be a false saving. I think there are budgets out there, pots of money out there. If we were so desperate to be trying to save that amount of money, I really do think there would be other places to look. So, irrespective of whether there's an election or not, and irrespective of who are the leading group after that election, I actually just don't think it's a good idea, and I will certainly be voting against it. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Small.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Well, I have to say, you started the year on a surprise, and it looks like you're ending it on one as well. I can't support this. I think it's ridiculous, unless we're going to turn into a bunch of Quakers wondering who's going to speak at any given point. I've actually been on the council long enough to actually serve under 4 leaders from different groups. They all did it in different ways. They all worked exceptionally hard. Most of them were in the town hall every single day. I think you chose to highlight one small element of what they do. I can simply say on the colleagues that I have known, they give far and above in terms of what they actually turn out to do, in terms of going to meetings, in terms of representing this council with different groups and different councils, etc. I don't think you've actually got a clear understanding of what a leader of a council does, so I will not be supporting this at all, and I would hope my members would join with me.
Councillor Singleton.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think it's fair to say that every administration needs a leader. And I know myself that our particular leader of this administration attends many meetings at various outside bodies, and also with the chief executive representing this administration. And I certainly can't support this amendment because every organisation requires a leader. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Redcliffe.
First of all, I agree with Councillor Harvey that the timing is not great. Having said that, if this were to be debated on another occasion, it wouldn't change my view that there seems to be, by yourself, a fundamental misunderstanding of the concept of leadership. It's one thing to look at a constitution, and it's one thing, for example, to look at a job description. But then in reality, you look at actually what happens with that person. And if an institution is leaderless, I take the analogy of a boat and somebody, in the tiller at the back there, and a light touch, sometimes a move in one direction, after talking to people in the boat. If you haven't got anybody doing that, I think, in a sense, you lose direction. Good leaders are often inspirational. They offer good sage advice. They listen. They take appropriate actions. But actually what they are is a catalyst, and they galvanise and they coordinate a whole range of sophisticated actions. And quite frankly, I don't know what the motivation for this. If it's to save money, then I'm afraid the argument would fall flat on its face, because without a leader and a deputy leader, you're effectively reducing the effectiveness of that organisation. And therefore, taxpayers might actually say, not value for money, not a good move in terms of saving money, because actually you're making the very institution that they're supposed to be leading less effective in terms of meeting the needs of the local community. So I'm struggling really to find any defence for getting rid of a deputy leader and a leader of file council. And I'm really quite confused in terms of where we're coming from on this. So I can't support that amendment, but thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any further speakers? Councillor Silverwood.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Well, I wasn't prepared for this, so like everybody else, so off the cuff. I must point out to members that when the Mayor has said that, that when you're saying that he's undermining his amendment by making the point that this isn't personal, this isn't political, because it was obvious as soon as his amendment was read out there'd be some yelps on my left-hand side. Because after the 2nd of May, if it is transposed, then this amendment is would be in place for whoever was the leader of the council. It is crucial that we look at every, leader of the council. You're speaking and Mr Mayor has said if we could all respect and be quiet. It's obviously very amusing what I'm saying. So we're supposed to look at our budget, and £13,000, there we are looking at £42,000 revenue on a kite festival and a tourism officer. Well, £13,000 would be towards another officer well on the way for an enforcement one. We're talking about special responsibilities, and those of us that serve on town and parish councils, when we chair, and we do have responsibilities there, we do it in our time. Very often we're full-time workers, but we make the time, but we don't expect to be recompensed for that. We don't do it because we're going to see a healthier bank balance whilst we've been leading that council. Perhaps you're saying you don't know, Councillor Small, what the leader does. Well, no, we don't. Because there's so much goes on behind scenes in these secret society little groups like the Budget Committee and things like that. Perhaps if the responsibilities were shared amongst the 51 people, then we would, perhaps the leader and the deputy leader would perhaps find it less onerous, and therefore wouldn't feel that it was fair that they were paid for their role. So, and I think just the usual sage saying of take care of the pennies and the pounds will look after themselves. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Fazakerley.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I really didn't want to say anything during this debate because I am in a rather awkward position being the current leader, but I would just like to draw the members' attention to something that's happened to me today. I've spent the day at meetings. This morning I was at the Lancashire District Leaders meeting, this afternoon at the Lancashire Leaders meeting. Now, I wonder who would replace me, or would they just sit round the 15 authorities and think, oh, Fylde isn't represented. Oh no, they don't have a leader. They've no say in anything and they can't take anything back to their councils what is happening. Who would go to those meetings, Mr Mayor?
Any other speakers on this item? Councillor Ashton.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. And I thought panto time was over. Oh no, it isn't. Because this is a sort of act you'd expect to see during the festive period at panto time. What a joke. This is what becomes of spending too long in opposition, because you don't know what it's like to lead a council. It's as simple as that. Has already been said, we cannot tie the hands of a future council. Let them decide what they want to do with the allowance for the leader and the deputy leader. These are two valuable posts in this authority. And from my understanding, these two individuals spend an inordinate amount of time in the town hall, not to mention outside the town hall, and visit these premises on a daily, if not weekly, basis. This is no more than pre-election political posturing by the mayor. It really is as simple as that. I can see the election leaflet now. I proposed removing £13,000, snouts in trough, leaders of the council. I can just see it now. I could write it for him. But it'll get you nowhere, Mr Mayor, because it's a joke, a real joke. And if you look at the allowance that the leader and the deputy leader receive, and you weigh up the number of hours they spend as leader and deputy leader, their hourly rate will be calculated in pence, not in pounds, in pence. And we all know this, all of us who serve on this council, that our allowance does not cover the amount of hours we spend as locally elected members. So what I advise you to do, colleagues, with this amendment is throw it into the dustbin. And I'd just like to finish on one important point, and that is there's one post that's significant by its absence from this amendment, and that's the allowance for the Leader of the Opposition. Now, why isn't the Leader of the Opposition included in this budget saving? And I'll tell you why. Because the Leader of the Opposition is lacklustre. And it's demonstrated tonight by the 2 amendments that she proposed. They were written on the back of a fag packet. And they weren't worthy of debate in this council chamber. I can assure you that, Mr. Mayor. That's why the Leader of the Opposition is not in this amendment. Because the post is valueless. It's as simple as that. Because we all know who the Leader of the Opposition is. And that leader is not a councillor. I'll leave that thought with you, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Fiddler.
Mr. Mayor, I've witnessed and experienced, I think it's approaching 40 mayors. And never in all that time have I witnessed anything so absolutely irresponsible as your amendment. And I disagree with some of my colleagues who have said, well, you don't understand the roles of the leader and the deputy leader. I can't agree with that. Of course he understands the role of the leader and the deputy leader. You do. I've witnessed you in action. You're quite an intelligent lad. So, why have you come along with such a stupid, irresponsible amendment? And, of course, we simply have to conclude, being very charitable, is that you've decided to be a little mischievous.
Councillor Rhodes.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Well, Councillor Ashton never fails to display his ignorance. He's been on this council for very many years and he's learnt very little in the time he's been here. The Leader of the Opposition does not receive any allowance whatsoever. And I can assure you, I spend a great deal of my time coming into this town hall and doing things. Now, his view of me, he's entitled to, and I have no problem with that. But when you look at his attendance at council, both here and at county, I would say that he's not really value for money. He gets paid a tremendous amount of money. And when you look at the number of attendances he puts in at both bodies, they're very poor. So he's probably one of the highest paid councillors in this country when you have a look at how much time and effort he puts into his duties. So I will not take any lesson from Councillor Ashton.
Do you have any other speakers on this amendment? Can I ask the Deputy Leader to sum up? Yeah. We'll go straight to the vote then. It's a recorded vote. I'll read out the amendment. I propose an additional recommendation that the positions of Leader of the Council and Deputy Leader of the Council be removed as soon as possible after the forthcoming elections, thereby making an annual saving of £13,000. Thank you.
If members could indicate if they are for or against the amendment or abstaining, please. Councillor Aitken.
Against.
Councillor Ashton.
Against.
Councillor Blackshaw. Councillor Buckley.
Abstain.
Councillor Chu.
Abstain.
Councillor Clayton.
Abstain.
Councillor Delma Collins. Councillor Corner. Councillor Dixon. Councillor Donaldson.
Against.
Councillor Fazakerley.
Abstain.
Councillor Fiddler. Councillor Ford. Councillor Green.
Against.
Councillor Harvey.
Has to be against.
Councillor Jakes.
Against.
Councillor Kirkham. Councillor Little. Councillor Lloyd. Councillor Mulholland. Councillor Edward Nash. Councillor Sally Nash. Councillor Nixon. Councillor Nolte. Councillor Oates. Councillor Pittman. Councillor Redcliffe. Councillor Rigby. Councillor Settle. Councillor Silverwood. Councillor Singleton. Councillor Small.
Against.
Councillor Speak. Councillor Thomas. Councillor Wilder. And the Mayor, Councillor Collins.
For.
225 and 9.
And Mr Mayor and members, the amendment is lost. 25 against, 2 for and 9 abstentions.
I've got a clean sheet.
Sorry?
I've got a clean sheet. Final vote.
Yes.
Thank you, members. That amendment was lost. If there are no further amendments, I will move to the recorded vote on the original motion. As this is Budget Council, this vote is also recorded. When the monitoring officer calls your name, please indicate.
So if members again could indicate if for, against or abstaining. Thank you. Councillor Aitken. Councillor Ashton. Councillor Blackshaw. Councillor Buckley. Councillor Chew. Councillor Clayton. Councillor Delma Collins. Councillor Corner. Councillor Dixon. Councillor Donaldson. Councillor Fazakerley. Councillor Fiddler. Councillor Ford. Councillor Green. Councillor Harvey. Councillor Jakes. Councillor Kirkham. Councillor Little. Councillor Lloyd. Councillor Mulholland. Councillor Edward Nash. Councillor Sally Nash. Councillor Nixon. Councillor Nolte. Councillor Oates. Councillor Pittman. Councillor Redcliffe. Councillor Rigby. Councillor Settle. Councillor Silverwood. Councillor Singleton. Councillor Small. Councillor Speak. Councillor Thomas. Councillor Wilder. Councillor Collins, the Mayor.
Abstain.
28, 5, 3.
Then the substantive motion, the budget, is carried with 28 for, 5 against and 3 abstentions.
Thank you, members, for quite an orderly budget meeting. That concludes tonight's business. Thank you very much.